After 26 years of dictatorship, Belarusians have taken to the streets in their thousands to fight for change. Thousands have been detained. The internet is shut off every night. But what exactly sparked the current standoffs between protesters and the regime forces? While discontent has been bubbling in Belarus for years, one of the factors contributing to the current protests was dictator Alexander Lukashenko's poor handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. He famously advised people to treat the disease by working in the fields and driving a tractor. And it was this discontent that led many, including highly placed elites and media personalities, to register as his opponents in the Belarusian presidential elections. Though calling an untransparent process that has consistently ended up with a single winner for 26 years an election may be stretching the term a little too far. But one by one, Lukashenko imprisoned or drove out candidates opposed to him. Banker Viktor Babariko was arrested on what are likely trumped-up charges. Diplomat Valery Tsepkalo fled and is currently in Ukraine following threats to his life. And popular blogger Sergei Tikhanovsky was also arrested. In their void, women stepped in. Maria Kolesnikova, campaign manager for Babariko, Veronika Tsepkalo, wife of Valery, and Tikhanovsky's wife, Svetlana. They united around Svetlana Tikhanovskaya's candidacy, forging the Belarusian opposition into a singular front that posed one of the largest threats to Lukashenko's rule in nearly 3 decades.
Our constitution isn't meant for women, and our society hasn't developed to the point where they would vote for women. Because, according to our constitution, the president possesses strong authority. The president will be a man. Of this I'm certain.
These women, immortalized in the now famous photo, played around Lukashenko's documented misogyny and managed to grow their movement in popularity and attention, largely thanks to Lukashenko's inability to recognize women as a threat to his rule.
I want to be president in order to bring fairness to this country. The authorities didn't register Sergei Tikhanovsky and other strong candidates. Why? Because they see threats from these men. But they fail to understand that the threat to power aren't the candidates, but the people who are tired of living in humiliation and chains.
Lukashenko tried every trick in the book to boost his flagging popularity. An independent poll, later banned, set his popularity amongst Belarusians at a measly 3%, giving rise to the popular slogan, the 97%, and saddling the dictator with the nickname Sasha 3%. On July 29th, 10 days before the election, Lukashenko suddenly announced the arrest of 33 Russian mercenaries from private military company Wagner, a company connected to Yevgeny Prigozhin, a businessman with close ties to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Despite Lukashenko's generally pro-Russian stance, friction arose between the two countries in recent months due to Lukashenko's rejection of the formation of a union state between Russia and Belarus, a move that would likely spell the end of Belarusian independence. Lukashenko claimed that the mercenaries were in the country to destabilize it, though there were many inconsistencies with that story. The Russians' positions was that they were transiting through Belarus to a third country. And while the veracity of that statement is hard to check, it was true that prior to their arrest, they were part of a group of 200, all staying at government-owned hotels and resorts, and were more or less open about their affiliation.
All versions are very contradictory. And there is a version of Lukashenko which says that these guys were preparing bombing and killing people and destabilizing situation in Belarus. But then why they came in the hockey military uniform and they stayed at KGB hotel, because it's a close friend to the KGB leader, the former director of the military hospital, who is the manager right there. So basically, it's not like the random private medical institution. This is very closely monitored institution where every guest is checked 35 times.
In the run-up to the presidential elections, hundreds of rallies were held in support of Tikhanovskaya and the opposition across major and minor cities and towns in Belarus, despite Lukashenko's best efforts to cow the Belarusian populace. One of Tikhanovskaya's strengths was, paradoxically, her inexperience and her insistence that she wasn't a politician. She would be in power only to organize new elections.
When I become president, do-over elections will be held in which all the alternative candidates will take part. I always said that I'm not a politician. I cannot run a country.
This meant that Tikhanovskaya appealed to a wide swath of the Belarusian public who believed that they weren't voting for a given political program or ideology, but only to oust Lukashenko. Rallies in support of Tikhanovskaya continued even when the regime authorities blocked their permits and engaged in repression. In one incident, a government rally to support Lukashenko was organized in a central square in Minsk, only to be abruptly taken over by an opposition rally. The DJs at the event, ostensibly there to play patriotic music, switched to a song by iconic Soviet rock group Kino, who played the song Перемен, Changes, the unofficial anthem of the protesters. Despite the fact that the rally was dispersed by regime security and that the DJs were immediately arrested, the mood was high and there was hope that Lukashenko's reign may soon come to an end. The day before the elections, Tikhanovskaya sent her children out of the country due to threats against their lives, and repression against opposition rallies and protests ramped up to levels rarely seen in modern Belarusian politics. On election day, no international observers were allowed to oversee the voting, not the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, nor even Russian observers who had traditionally been present in previous elections. Even independent Belarusian observers could only sit well outside the polling stations and were monitored by armed police. And by the end of voting, over 60 independent journalists and observers had been arrested. Veronika Tsepkalo fled the country due to threats, and even Tikhanovskaya herself was forced into hiding for a few hours before emerging to cast her symbolic vote. Regime authorities established checkpoints in and out of Minsk, and internet access became sporadic and unstable. Meanwhile, lines formed around city blocks, both in Belarus and at Belarusian embassies around the world.
You know, I've been standing here for 6 hours already. The embassy staff have done everything they could to prevent us from voting.
Meanwhile, official government statistics were claiming that over 42% of the population had already participated in early voting, a number starkly at odds with the unfolding scenes of lines stretching out in Belarusian cities. Video evidence of fraud, including a video of an election official sneaking out of a polling station via a back window, were widely spread on social media and messenger applications. And some stations reported turnout of over 100%.
I checked my ballot, and I just noticed on the photograph that there is already a dot in the Lukashenko box, even though I very clearly marked Tikhanovskaya. I'm just in shock. There's going to be evidence that we already have lots of voting violations, and we'll be working within the law.
As voting wrapped up, preliminary exit polls were released by the Belarusian government. Lukashenko was forecasted to win with almost 80% of the vote, and Tikhanovskaya just 10%. That night, Belarusians took to the streets. Over 3,000 people were arrested that first night on August 9th. Tikhanovskaya, who on August 10th went to file a complaint at the Belarusian Central Election Commission, disappeared, appearing only the next day in Lithuania, and the Lithuanian foreign minister stated that she had been forced to leave the country. 2 videos emerged of the candidate, one in which she stated that she made a tough decision and admitted to lacking the strength to push through the very real risks to herself and her family. Members of Tikhanovskaya's campaign stated that her husband, still a political prisoner of the regime, was used in these threats. Then a second video emerged on a pro-government Telegram channel before being spread on the web, where she seemingly read a conciliatory statement admitting her defeat and advised Belarusians to stay at home.
Dear citizens of the Republic of Belarus, I, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, thank you for your participation in the election for the head of the state. The people of Belarus have made their choice. With warmth and gratitude, I address all the citizens that supported me throughout this time, Belarusians. I implore you to respect and hold the law in good faith. I do not want blood and violence. I ask you to not resist the police and to not go to the squares in order to avoid risking your lives. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.
Out of the 3 women, only Maria Kolesnikova remains in Belarus, while Veronika Tsepkalo recorded a statement in which she affirmed her support for Tikhanovskaya and called for the international community to recognize Tikhanovskaya as the legitimate victor of the elections. Protests in Belarus continue, even without an opposition figure to rally behind. Over 6,000 people have been detained in total, with released prisoners relating stories of torture, beatings, and unprecedented violence from regime authorities. Lukashenko has yet to back down, despite his repressions failing to yield fruit. But on the streets of Belarus and across the world, there is a singular call for the freedom of the country. Живе Беларусь! Long live Belarus!